and say who you are.
So I'm Jillian Lane. I'm a resident of Greenland. First of all, I just want to say that I appreciate the work of this task force, and someone who's been following this and invested in this. It's been a tremendous source of sort of comfort throughout the process of learning about everything that's going on our seacoast. And I appreciate the opportunity to submit a letter to the recommendations that are going to the commission. And I just have a question because I think it can't go unsaid. There was an alarming letter to the editor that was printed on Sunday, where a future member of the commission, Steve Kenda, made comments that basically said the cancer cluster doesn't exist. And I know as a public citizen that's been following this and invested in this, that was extremely disheartening and disturbing to read. And I know for the families that have been directly impacted that are also following this and invested in this, it was a horrible thing to read. And I was hoping that Department of Health and Human Services could comment on that statement that was made that there is no cancer cluster.
Yes, thank you for that question. So, that came from the first meeting out of the commission. And so, I think this is obviously going to be a topic of discussion for the commission. But the Department of Health and Human Services has called this a cancer cluster, and we have been investigating this as a cancer cluster. And we have issued, a couple different reports that I've already mentioned, outlining the work that we've done to try and address community concerns. And so we certainly understand the sensitivity around this and the concern. And we have worked very hard, I think, to try and work with families and understand the concerns so that we can try and address them. And we will continue to do that.
Dr. Addis.
Sorry again. I read that letter also, and, other than it was wrong, I don't know how else you can say it. I mean, I would say a lie, but we're not talking about other people. It is very important for people who are given the honor of serving on a commission not to put their foot in their mouth publicly. And by looking not very bright, they bring down the whole future recommendations of that commission. And I don't know who Mr. Kendra, I don't even know that's his name, is, but I think if somebody's nominated to a commission that's going to solve a problem impinging on the health of New Hampshire, then, and they admit in their letter or article that they haven't read or attended any meetings or read any reports, that, give me a break. I mean, this guy you're going to put on a commission, somebody who comes out with an opinion without having read, seen, or heard anything, and also misinterpreted what little data he had. So to my mind, I think you all should opine on this. I mean, you all are responsible for all this. We were arguing between, a word like between and among, and then you have somebody who's going to have probably more visibility once you guys are gone. And he obviously has a savior somewhere up in government. I think that it deserves a direct comment on that opinion in your report. Okay, and again, that time I did, well, whatever.
Thank you
I
for.
still was more calm than I usually am.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Addis. Yes.
Hi, I'm Paula Skelly. I'm a resident of Portsmouth. I'm also a mother of one of the children who was considered a part of the cancer cluster. And I would ask that the task force, in making recommendations, would recommend anybody who has been so uninvolved, such as Mr. Kenda, and uninformed, be recommended that he not remain on the commission if he does not even believe that there is a cancer cluster? How can he investigate said cancer cluster?
Thank you. I can't speak for the whole task force. What I can be clear about is that the task force, the mission of the task force has been based on a determination, a statistical determination after an initial investigation as to whether the number of pediatric cancers in the Seacoast met the federal requirement or federal criteria for determination as a cancer cluster. It's not a name that somebody made up. It is a designation that is defined by the CDC. And I would applaud the work of the department in doing a very thorough investigation of the cancer registry, doing the statistical analysis, and ending up with that this analysis showed that this incidence of cancer met the statistical requirements that are a part of the designation of a cancer cluster. This isn't a subjective term. I'm sure it's frightening to some, and Paula, who is here, I'm sure it was frightening to her, having been through what she's been through. I know many of the parents of the children affected, and the whole process is terrifying. It is not more terrifying when it's called a cancer cluster. In some ways, I think for some of them, they're part of something. And maybe there's an investigation to try to understand what that something is and why it occurred. My own opinion, and I won't speak for the task force, is that that is what the designation is. It's nothing more, nothing less than an objective determination that was made by the Department of Health and Human Services. One of the things that we've been really careful about on this task force, even when I was running for office, was to make sure it was not political. Once you start getting into statutory commissions, I think you start getting political. And I would hope, and I know the chair, and I've worked with him very closely many times, and I think he will do everything he possibly can to not let it go down that rabbit hole. But for my part in the task force and the honor of serving with such devoted and dedicated people is that we have been acting in good faith throughout this process based on a federal designation of a cancer cluster. And that's where I think it should sit. And how this is interpreted, and this is my own opinion, and I'll ask the task force for their input. Whatever happens from here on, whether people on the commission believe that this is a that this is a cancer cluster or not, I think it all comes back to the investigation, the federal designation, and whether we met that federal criteria. And as far as I'm concerned, and as far as I've been concerned for the over 2 years of work that has gone into this, this meets the criteria for a federal designation as a cancer cluster, and let's move forward, not backwards. So any other task force members have some input on this?
What is the official name of the new commission?
There's a good question. The HB 484 Commission. It's
I'll get it.
Well, that's what I read in the paper.
Representative Cushing, while we're getting that.
If Senator Stiles wants to
No, I'll wait till we get the answer.
I just want to say that how grateful I am for having had the opportunity to serve on this task force for the past 15 months, 16 months, however long we've been around. I've learned a lot about it. I think it would have been irresponsible for us to have our Department of Health and Human Services recognize that there was a cancer cluster here in the Seacoast and do nothing and ignore it. That's just not acceptable. And I know that we've been very diligent and have worked very hard. I will note, I was incredibly dismayed to hear the comments that were made concerning whether or not a cancer cluster existed. And I was also dismayed to find that a former colleague, legislative colleague of mine, took it upon himself to criticize two members of this task force. That would be you, Dr. Sherman, and you, Representative Messmer, because I think that does us all a disservice. I recognize that the decision about who gets placed upon the new commission was not, it's in the hands of the appointing authorities, and they're ultimately responsible to do that. I would hope that we're able to take the work that we've done through this task force as members of the commission and really try to address the concerns of the families who've been directly impacted by the cancer cluster.
So the commission says Commission on the Seacoast Cancer Cluster Investigation.
That is the name of it. That's what it is. It's been designated as such. You can't change legislation by just saying it's not so. So that's what the name of the commission is. We have worked long and hard. I appreciate the agency's involvements in this because I think they have kept us, honestly, on an even keel. And the new commission, I have every bit of faith with the members that are sitting at this table that are also serving on the new commission. We'll shut that down pretty quickly.
Can I make a
Representative Penelakis.
I haven't been able to attend every meeting, but I want to say that the meetings that I've attended and the information I've got from the subcommittees has been outstanding. They have worked very hard. And I'm sorry to see someone that puts his mouth in gear before he puts his brain in motion, and that's just what he did. He would have known that if he'd even come to one of these meetings, he'd have known that it was done with every little item that we could to look at. And I just want to thank the departments, and I'm glad that we had this, but I wish that it had not gone to a commission. It had stayed amongst us, and we would have gone a lot further. Thank you.
We can keep an eye on them, Laura.
Yes, they're open. The meetings are open to any of the public that wants to attend those meetings. I just have one suggestion then possibly. Is there a way that we could strengthen the language? I just looked for cluster. I searched on it. There's not that much in terms of the background on how the cluster was determined, or maybe attach the original report to the appendix.
We can certainly attach, you can put that in the appendix under the cancer cluster. I think it gives a nice summary and introduction, and
Yeah, we
maybe
can go back and look at that again. I don't remember the exact wording, but
or even putting that report in there. It's not a super long report.
Just
correct?
to have it all in one place, so.
Representative Malloy.
Thank you. I was only serving on this for less than a year, and this was all new to me. So I had to do a lot of catching up with a lot of the information and trying to understand the science and the science of it. I certainly understand the human and the emotional part of it. And I would suggest that if your last little speech was recorded, we edit that down and publish that in the paper and clearly explain that it is a cancer cluster, and that's what we're doing.
Yes. Could you come up to a mic and make sure everybody knows who you are?
It's Julie Tucker. I live in Rye, and I am going to be on the commission, or I am on the commission. But I don't think, I think what everyone's forgetting is the public has been so confused by this. Obviously not the public that's been here, but the public I know in Rye. And it hasn't helped that we've heard Dr. Shan should resign. You know, the DES isn't doing their job. The public is getting very confused because you don't know who to trust anymore. And I think that's why a lot of these questions are coming up. So I don't know if going forward, if someone says, well, the EPA isn't doing this, or Dr. Chan isn't doing this, or DES isn't doing this, that could be addressed, I don't know, somehow so that the public isn't not sure who they should trust anymore. And that was a big thing I saw, being that I actually lived through. I was like, well,
Right.
if this person should step down, then we shouldn't listen to a word he says. Or so,
Well, I think, this is as we know, this is a free society where everybody is allowed to speak out, and
That's right.
there, we all have a responsibility in that society to stay engaged and to hear all sides.
exactly.
The one thing I would say, and you were there for this, at the first commission meeting, Representative McMahon, who's chair, made it clear that his hope was that the commission would speak with one voice and that the commission would move forward. Of course, that hasn't happened yet, as we saw in the paper, but I think the intent is very strongly there. I know Representative McMahon, and the idea is that we do everything we can to move forward together, that we voice issues and concerns at the commission meetings, and whatever we take out, it's not a gag order, but it's asking us to work within that room. And I think that will solve some of the concerns you have, where those concerns are being voiced in that room. They can be addressed at the time, and they don't need to be the sideshow, a sideshow like
Exactly.
we saw over the last week. So I'm hoping that that is the case for the commission, and I'm glad you're on it. And I think bringing that perspective is very important, that we try to work within the commission to get that message.
So the
solidified.
public isn't so confused that they don't know what's going on and who
Right.
to listen to. And
Right.
so that's, I guess, all I wanted to say was I feel like it needs to be less attacks of who should step down and who should resign and who shouldn't be on the commission. There are people on the commission to find out what's occurring, and now they're not sure who to trust. So
Right.
Well, I think your voice on the commission will do you just fine.
I just would like to say that I don't think any of us were really, I was very disturbed of what he said in the paper, for the simple fact that he had never attended 24 meetings that were held here or more, and that he had only been to one meeting of the cancer cluster to put his viewpoint forward the way he did. I give him every right to that. But I think he could have waited and gone to a second meeting and read this report we've given before he did that.
I would propose that the task force, as in a sense, not respond, except to make sure that our report reflects that this was a determination of a cancer cluster by the department, and it was a response to that cancer cluster by all of the agencies to do an investigative, collaborative, and enhanced communication. That was actually the original role of the task force. And I just think we need to take the high road and stay above this in a respectful and straightforward and non-political way. And I hope the commission does that as well. Yes,
I've
Representative
been in
Pamela.
the legislature for 39 years, and I never have seen anyone come out of a commission meeting and do something like that. It's really hard because it's hard to get people to serve on a commission. And this particular one, Cancer Cluster, is an emotional one if you have family.
Yeah, it is. Yes, one last comment. I'm trying to read your sandwich board.
It says, tell me a story about water.
Okay.
So hi, my name's Debbie Lockwood. I'm from Durham, and I'm an environmental journalist. I've been traveling in 16 countries for the last 3 years, making audio recordings of people's stories about water and climate change. And I have bylines in the New York Times, The Guardian, Pacific Standard, NPR. I'm interested in breaking this story to a more national audience because I think it would do a lot to uplift the narrative, to give some clarity to people who are confused, and to just give some further kind of public legitimacy to what you guys are doing. So I want to make myself available. Would love to do interviews with anyone who's currently on the commission. I've already talked with Mindy. hoping to just make this as broad a story as possible. So please find me afterward. I would love to be in touch and amplify your work. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, Representative Cushing.
Thank you for the job that you've done, Tom.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you, Tom.
Excuse me,
Yes.
another comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jillian.
I just feel the need to respond to Ms. Tucker's comments. I think this has been a very emotional, complicated, difficult topic to address. And I think everybody at this table has brought their best selves to the table. And Coakley in particular is sort of the loaded gun that is difficult, that I think, for everyone to deal with. And I think there's an assumption in the public that there's been an attempt to directly connect these two issues, and that is not what has happened in this room. And I want to make that clear, that I've never experienced that what is trying to happen in this room is that we say Coakley caused this cancer cluster. Coakley is simply a symptom of the greater problem that we have on the seacoast. And so we have this cancer cluster, and we start thinking about what's going on our seacoast, and what we start to talk about is the Navy Yard, Seabrook Nuclear Power Plant. And, you know, one of the issues that, part of the reason why Coakley was kind of loaded and alarming in the beginning, and I think you remember me, Dr. Chan, from that original cluster meeting, was I went to that cluster meeting to hear about Coakley because I had learned subsequently that it was in my backyard, and that terrified me. And so it's been sort of a loaded issue from the beginning. And part of this process is also that people trying to do their best are also limited sometimes by the roles that they're in and by the positions that they serve. And that doesn't mean anything about, it doesn't say anything about what people's intentions are or the good intentions that they brought to this process, but that simply, we work within systems sometimes, and sometimes those systems limit us. And one way to challenge that is to go around those systems in ways, and by using the media and by bringing greater attention. And this is an issue that needs more attention. This is a problem that is not going away. This is not going to be resolved at the commission level. There's so much work to be done, and I'm proud of the foundation that this task force laid for that work to be done. And I'm proud to have been an observer of the process and providing input when I could. And I thank you all for the hard work that you did. And I just think that's an important clarification. Having been in this room the entire time, the world needs to know that nobody is trying to connect Coakley and the cancer cluster. Coakley is a symptom of the problem that needs to be addressed. And I thank you again.
Thank you. I would add one other part to this, which is many of you know that I was chair of a national foundation to work on cancer prevention. And one of the things that I think a lot of people, because we focus so much on the seacoast, but I guarantee you that Mike and Jim have the broader perspective. This is not just a seacoast problem. This is a national problem. This is Otis Air Force Base down in the Cape.
Here's what I found on the web for what is.
Thank you. So